Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Morgan Anderson. He's the CEO and founder of Golden Lion Tax Solutions and the author of Tax Debt Rule Number One. There's always a solution. And for the last 24 plus years, Morgan has represented thousands of clients before the IRS and state tax agencies, successfully identifying the best solutions given their unique financial situation and then negotiating their acceptance. Welcome to the show, Morgan.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here with you.
You are welcome to the show, Morgan. You are welcome to India in this online form, and I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk about. We'll be talking about how one can conquer tax debt. So, in that sense, a lot of examples or whatever you'll speak will applicable not just in the US or any other North American countries, but others also can learn a lot of things. And a lot of Indians do have businesses with the US and in Canada and other places. So we'll talk about that. But first to understand from you, Morgan, about your story, 24 plus years into this. Tell us a bit about your story, about your journey into tax. Firstly, why did you get into this this thing called tax debt resolution field? It can be quite taxing.
Ba-dum-bumch. It was an accident. I have always loved numbers. I've always loved negotiating. I've always loved being a problem solver. And I answered an ad when I was 25 years old and didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I ended up working for a company that specialized in tax debt resolution here in the States. And I fell in love with it. I love helping people who are getting these notices from the IRS, from the states, that are very intimidating and scary. You always have this mental image of the tax agencies showing up at your door with a gun and a badge saying, we're going to take everything we can because you owe us money. And there are very easy to address ways to prevent it from ever getting to that degree. So I fell in love with this program and with this career path, and it's something that inspires me to this day because every case is different. Your financial condition is different than the next person. And though you may have a tax debt similar to somebody else, the solution always depends on your financial condition, not how much money you owe. So we end up going into this problem solving portion of our work to say, this is the best solution available to the taxpayer. And then we put on our armor and go to battle with the tax agency to push for it to be approved.
Right, Morgan. So I want to understand for a lot of general viewers, especially in this part of the world, why do you call it tax debt? Tax in itself should be enough, but when does it become debt, or is it tax debt by the term itself?
It's that by the term itself, because by the time you need to address it with somebody of my level, it should have already been paid. And maybe it could be, if you're a business owner, maybe it should have been paid 3 or 4 quarters ago. For individuals, it could be 3 or 4 years ago or even further back. So at that point, it's not just a tax that's due, it's a tax that's past due.
Absolutely. So, Morgan, I want to understand generally, either as an individual or as a business, you know that you have to pay certain taxes.
Mhm.
A lot of taxes in India, you pay in advance also, as soon as the business is done, or you collect, like we have the GST. So businesses, they collect GST whenever there is any transaction, and that GST has to be paid to the government, and then that gets offset afterwards in anything that you do. Even in
Mhm.
individual taxpayers cases, uh, if you are a salaried person, then it gets deducted at source. Your employer deducts it on your behalf, and then they submit it to the tax authorities and give you the receipt for that.
Mhm.
Why is it that people then there have this problem? Is it that they are not aware or that they have to pay tax? Is it because of that sort of a lack of financial or tax literacy there in businesses or individuals? Or is there another case? There is a lot of dispute that somebody understands that and they try to redress that, get that redressal for that, and it does not happen, and then suddenly the IRS lands at your house or office. How does that work? I want to understand normally what sort of cases you get and how does those things work. One is that it happens sometimes, some dispute ends up in a difficult situation, but generally
Yeah.
people should pay their own taxes in time.
Great question. It goes down to the fundamentals of how tax is collected. So, as a self employed individual, income tax, for example, you don't have an employer taking the tax out of the pay that you receive. So, you have to self report it and self pay it. Some people don't understand the depth of the tax that they need to pay related to the income they're earning after all expenses are considered. Some people, when they go through the expenses and at the end of the day, they say, "Oh, I don't have the money to pay the tax." Some are business owners that get into a financial bind because their job when they pay their employees is to take the tax out of the gross pay that the employee receives, hold that money in trust to then turn over to the federal or the state government or whatever type of regional municipality you have to pay it to. But because they get into a financial bind, they may not pay it. So there's a lot of different ways with sales tax or anything that you collect related to a product that you sell. As the business owner, you're supposed to collect that sales tax, hold it in trust to also turn over to the state, the municipality, whomever is overseeing that sales tax transaction and requirement. And sometimes the money gets stolen from somebody within the infrastructure of the business. Sometimes there's an in house bookkeeper or accountant who's in charge of overseeing the company collecting and holding these taxes to turn over to the state, the IRS, the municipality. And they don't do it, or they steal that money and tell the business owner, "Oh, I paid it," but they actually didn't. I've seen a lot of different scenarios that has caused somebody to have a tax debt situation that needs to be addressed.
Right, right, Morgan. So is it because uh, we hear a lot of ease of business in the US, in that
Mm,
part of the world? So is it easy to open a business but difficult to solve a tax case? Also, whenever there is a tax liability that you need to pay tax,
mhm.
don't the authorities keep on sending reminders either on email or through posts? That's the norm. How many reminders do they generally send, and why can't the businesses or individuals they respond to those? Still, it comes down to a problem that they land up at your door. Why it happen, or don't they send notices
Sure.
before?
Another great question. The hard part is notices have to be triggered by a computer database that manages all the information. Here in the US, the IRS's database is severely outdated. It doesn't have the technology to receive the millions of pieces of data that it receives on a weekly and monthly basis. and correlate that to the record of who is supposed to be reporting a tax, who is supposed to be paying. Actually, the IRS database on individuals is behind at least 2 to 3 years. So it'll be 2 to 3 years before you even hear from our federal government, from the IRS. States are a little quicker because they're a smaller municipality. They tend to pop up within a year or two of a tax return not being filed or not being paid. But the federal government, because it's so large, it's just an inefficient system, and it just takes time for them to put two and two together and have it equal. Oh gosh, this person owes us a return or owes us payment that they didn't make.
Right. So isn't that a case in itself that listen, you guys have been inefficient, and now you ask me to pay tax all of a sudden? Which is what is the law there? What does the law
Yeah.
say about this?
No, no. We wish it would be that simple, right? At least in my industry. But taxpayers here have an obligation to voluntarily report and pay the taxes that they're required to collect and or pay over. So we can't say to the IRS, well, you didn't let us know we didn't follow through on our obligation timely. So you should take off all the penalties and the interest, and you should forgive me from having to pay this. Our system doesn't work that way. Congress would never let those laws be in place.
Right. I do understand governments need taxes, especially if you have collected from others and you need to pay.
Right.
So when does it become a problem? Means I know paying taxes can be a very difficult thing, especially if you have got the money and then you want to. A lot of people look at tax evasion also on whatever pretexts if whenever they can get. So why is it that they still, when they know that there is no way out of this, why don't they pay? Especially businesses who have already collected taxes on from others, because they need to submit it to the government. Is it the mindset, or is it because there are loopholes in the system, or is it because they know that Morgan will save them?
Maybe a little bit of all of it. It typically starts with they get into a financial bind, right? Like, let's take a roofing company, for example. If they are in a financial bind and they don't pay their supplier, they don't have the resources to put the next roof on for a client that will then give them money to come into the business to hopefully get them caught up, right? So they just get underfunded and behind, and they start robbing Peter to pay Paul. With and most clients of mine over the last 24 years, they're really good people. They're really honest people. They just don't know what to do when they get in a financial bind and they make a bad judgment call. Because if you don't pay your electricity bill, your lights are going to go off. If you don't pay the tax bill, your lights are still on, right? So it comes down to the lesser of the evils. And what happens is, because they miss a tax deposit or they miss filing and paying a return, they don't hear anything for a while. It becomes a very easy place to borrow that money from continuously, always with the intent of, well, when I get that next big contract, I'm going to get caught up. When I get that next big deal coming in, I'm going to pay my past due tax and we'll be good. And unfortunately, with those situations, 95% of the time, it just doesn't happen.
Right, Morgan. So when do you come into the picture? And uh, is it because before the IRS lands at your door, or is it before that?
I've had it both ways. I've had it where people say, okay, my business has stabilized, my income has stabilized, I'm ready to start facing this. I've got a couple of years of tax returns we need to file and pay. And I've had other ones where people call me and say, oh my gosh, an agent from the IRS showed up at our office yesterday and they're taking my bank account balances. They're dropping my bank accounts to zero. Help me right away. And everything in between. Everybody's situation is unique. And the big thing to know is that you should always be proactive if you've gotten behind, because then you're in the driver's seat. Then you're controlling the way the collection game starts taking place. If you wait until the IRS or the municipality or the state realizes you haven't been compliant, and then they start coming after you with everything they've got to try to recoup the money that's owed, you're going to be on your heels and they're in control at that point.
Right, right, Morgan. Now, a lot of people may be aware about their business, but they don't know that solutions are, as you say, there is always a solution. Solutions are also available if you deal with the IRS or the state tax authorities in a good manner. What are the options that are there that people are generally not aware of? And whenever it comes to tax, they get a bit fearful than any other situation. But they should not be, because there are options available. What are the general options that you would like people to be aware of? Even if they don't know, Morgan, they will know about these options, so that they can take these things properly forward. And whenever they need, they can always have you have your expertise.
Yeah. So any tax agency, if you come to them and say, I haven't paid this tax bill, I owe this money, I don't have the money to pay it in full right now, they will always set up some type of monthly payment to get that bill addressed. Other things that you can ask for are, anytime you have a tax debt, they are always adding penalties and interest. Depending on what caused the tax debt to accrue, you can ask for the penalties to be removed or forgiven. There's ways with some tax agencies you can settle the tax debt for a lower amount, a percentage. It's usually based on your financial condition, what you have, equity and assets, and your monthly income versus your expenses. In other cases, they'll say, you know what, just stay compliant moving forward. We see that you can't afford to pay this right now. Let's stay in touch over the next 5, 6, 10 years, and we'll see if your financial condition changes. Just you can't add any more to the debt. Another solution option that we look at is equity in real estate. Can you borrow money to maybe pay it? Here in the States right now, our interest rates are really high. I think interest rates around the world are higher than they had been 5, 10 years ago. But right now, our tax agencies have done the same thing. 2 years ago, the IRS would charge 3% interest on an unpaid tax. Right now, they're charging 8%. And when you're paying a debt owed to the tax agencies, you can't benefit at all from it on your current tax return. But if you borrow money from your home, from the equity in your home, you may get a loan at 6.5%. And the interest that you pay as you repay that mortgage, you can create a benefit on your annual tax return, lowering your current taxes because of the interest you're paying on that note. Then you have the tax agency out of your hair. You're paying on a loan that benefits you on your annual tax return, and you're paying a lesser interest rate. So there's a lot of different ways that we leverage a client's condition to best address the entire tax debt picture.
Wonderful, wonderful. There are so many solutions you just gave, and I. So, are people not aware of this, or they just know about this, but they find that it's difficult to face these tax people because they can be very dangerous with the gun? Is it like that?
It's a little bit of all of it. Most of my clients, they have this mental image of the tax agencies showing up with a gun and a badge, and I'm going to take your car, I'm going to take your firstborn. A lot of the fear of the unknown paralyzes them into an inaction, and then it keeps getting bigger and it causes more anxiety and sleepless nights, and they just don't even know where to start. So that's where my book comes in. Tax debt rule number one: there's always a solution. You just have to say, okay, I'm going to stop living under this cloud, and I'm going to start addressing this problem. That it's always starts with those first steps, and then you gain momentum, and before you know it, you've got a solution in place and you're on the other side of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's what I was going to come to. Debt rule number one. Your book. There's always a solution. So people who may not be aware of the law about taxes, tax debt, they can read this book and know about not just some of the solutions you gave, but other solutions also that are available to them. Who is this book actually for? Is it for the general people, business people, or also for the tax authorities?
It's for any tax paying business entity or individual, or even accountants and professionals, tax professionals. So they get an idea of how a tax debt situation comes about. They get a peek into how audits are typically handled and options to address them. Insight and information on basic initial notices that are sent out by the IRS and the states here in the US. It probably does correlate to other countries as well. What the difference is between a lien and a levy and a garnishment, and the top 10 resolution options that we have here in the states that is led by the IRS, and most states follow suit as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. So there is much to learn about all these things. Learn about how you provide your services. So for people who would like to know more about your book, about you, about your services, what is the best way for them to connect with you, Morgan?
Through our website, goldenliontaxsolutions.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook. I am happy to share basic information with everybody, point people in the right direction if it doesn't make sense for our firm to get involved. A lot of times people will call me and say, oh, I can't sleep. I've got this big debt owed to the state or the IRS. And we start talking about it. And it's something that they can manage with a little bit of guidance themselves. And it won't cost them anything out of pocket. Then, of course, there are the ones where it's, oh my gosh, I haven't filed for my business for 6 years and I've got 30 employees and I owe payroll tax and I owe income tax. And then we say, okay, yeah, that's a case we should get involved with. But we're happy to go through with anybody a tax debt concern that they have, and we'll give you as much guidance as we can and talk about if it makes sense for us to get involved.
Wonderful, wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.